From the moment we're born, we are acted upon by the influences of the world we're born into. The programming of things like language, culture, aesthetics, behaviour and etiquette all start to imprint themselves upon us. And so too do experiences, expectations, incidents and accidents, joy and happiness, and also trauma and hurt. All of these things embed themselves in our memories, our neural pathways, our subconscious, and ultimately our ego and our identities and our inner narratives. And then this crucially impacts the way we perceive the world and interact with it. Then, in turn, this has huge implications for our quality of life. If we go smiling into the world, sometimes the world smiles back. But with all of these things from our world and our experiences imprinted upon us, it can be difficult to see where we end and our baggage begins. And when this baggage begins to weigh heavy upon us and ultimately impacts the direction and the quality of our existence, we can very easily start to believe that life and the world around us are treating us unfairly. And yet, none of this injustice has anything to do with what's going on deep inside within our own psyches. That is, until we start to dig and offload some of those things that have been dragging us off course. I'm Chris Brock, and this is Conversations on Living, a podcast about how to be well, do well, and live well. This week I'm speaking with Polly Bateman. She's a mindset performance coach, but that title is a huge simplification of the work she does with her clients. She believes that in order to truly get the most out of life, we need to align the way we go into the world with who we really are. And that means unstitching the internal narratives, digging deep into the past experiences, the stories and the traumas that impact who we think we are, and how we go about our daily lives. And we also talk about the books she's writing for children, about the Grumpet, a character she has created to help them manage their thoughts and feelings. You can find out more about Polly online at thepollybateman.com, that's thepollybateman.com, and also on Instagram at thepollybateman. And before we get into this conversation, just a quick word, as always, about Plane. So Plane is a video game, and its goal is to help you develop a mindfulness and meditation practice. So if you've never experienced meditation or given it a go and you want to, but you don't know how to begin, and perhaps video games are your cup of tea, then Plane is certainly worth checking out. It's easy to find, just Google meditation game and it should be the first one that comes up, or you can head over to the website at plane.co, that's PLAYNE.co. And just a quick request from me, don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to this podcast, and also check out our website where you can find all the episodes and also information about my books, my writings, and there's some meditations on there as well. That's at conversationsonliving.com. And there's also a Facebook group if you want to carry on the conversation. Just search for Conversations on Living. And if you want to sign up to the newsletter, then you should get something in your inbox about once a month, some ideas, some links to recent conversations, that sort of thing. Just head over to the website, conversationsonliving.com, and sign up, and you'll get a tasty free download as well. Anyway, that's enough of that. Now onto this conversation with the exciting and enthusing Polly Bateman. Polly, thank you for coming on the podcast. We tried to do this a week ago, but there were blustery storms around here that kind of scuppered everything in terms of our internet connection, that kind of thing. So this is take two. And I'm so glad that you've been able to reschedule, because it's you've had an amazing story yourself, and you're now kind of helping other people with their own stories. And I guess, for want of a better phrase, you kind of call yourself a mindset performance coach, because that's something that people find relatively easy to get their head around. But what you do actually goes a lot deeper and touches many more things than this. And it goes back to a kind of awakening that you had back in 2016. So maybe if we could start with your story, and then we can kind of explore how that can help other people with their own stories as well.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for having me. Good to be here. Where would I start? So essentially, I had been coaching for 20 years. Well, actually at that point, I'd been an official coach for 11, but in the coaching environment for 14, 15 years. And I very much understood what I did as a coach. I was a good coach, I did well, but it was in 2016 when my husband went away for a whole year, and our only child, because we're a mobile family, went off to boarding school to create stability, that I had this like holy moly moment my whole sort of structure had just disappeared. And sometimes I could go several days without seeing anybody. And that's quite an intense experience, because you're kind of left with you at the end of the day. And if you are running any programs where you don't like yourself very much, or your relationship with yourself is fractured in any way, which I had no idea mine was, then you will be quite confronted by that experience. And I was confronted. I was fine for the first 3 months, but then it was a sort of slow wearing down, sort of like a war of attrition of being with myself over an extended period of time. And if I just explain, for the purpose of the listener, what it might look like if you don't have a great relationship with yourself, it will show up in some of the most subtle ways where it almost looks like you do, because you'll be defensive about you. You will protesteth probably too much sometimes and defend yourself. And obviously that's a repeat of being defensive, but it's that nuance where you'll need to be right about things, and where you'll feel misunderstood and misheard. And actually those sit at the core of the fact that you don't have a great relationship with you, and so you're not great at explaining your needs, what it is, you're not great at speaking up, what it is you truly want in your life, and you don't know how to put those needs forward, so they come out in maybe a moany or a blamey way. And while I had a very good relationship with my husband, in that it was a strong marriage, it had been tumultuous as well. And I suppose that if I look back, we don't have the same marriage and the same relationship anymore. It's completely transformed. And I think that what happens is, as your relationship with yourself transforms, your relationship with everybody else does as well, because everybody else is a reflection of the relationship you have with yourself. So what I did in 2016 was got to a low point. and that's where we all go, right? And then we hit rock bottom. And it didn't look like rock bottom, in that I wasn't broke with the last pound in my purse or anything like that. I wasn't well off either. We were just sort of getting by. We're a military family. We weren't killed with wages. And when I looked around to explain, like, what's the reason for why I don't earn the money? It was like, well, it's because we're a mobile family, and it's because of you, Tom, and your career. And, there was lots of looking at my circumstances and using them to explain my situation as if that was real in some way. And then when you start to do the work on yourself later on, you realize, oh no, that's just the convenient excuse I like to use. But I was actually at dinner with a couple of girlfriends that I think we only met once that year. So, having just said I was lonely, then I'm like at dinner, but it was a rare occurrence. And one of them is a psychiatrist. And I said, I think I'm a bit depressed. And I said, I don't need a doctor or anything. I certainly don't want to drug myself in any way, but I think I'm a bit depressed. And she looked at me very calmly. And she said, darling, I have no doubt that you're depressed. And it was coming from my psychiatrist mate. And I was like, oh, knickers, I might need to do something about this, because I appreciated enough through my coaching career to understand how that was bleeding out. But I think the biggest thing that had me take action was that my life, I couldn't understand why my life didn't work. How had I ended up there? And I had this kind of internal rage, like, I'm a good person, I help old ladies over the road. I don't kick cats. I'm like a good human being. I'd give you a quid if you needed it, And it's like, why does my life not work the way I want it to? Why does stuff keep happening? And it felt like I was constantly surviving the process of life, even if on the outside it looked all right. And, and I would say as well, I looked like this and I sounded like this. I think I'm way calmer now. And I'm not the only person that would say that. I kind of had a performing Polly persona that would come out when I went to dinner parties and things like that. And that's actually because you have to flow. And if you're not as expressed as you want to be, and I don't mean being loud and noisy and flamboyant, but being able to say the chewy stuff, the stuff that needs to be said sometimes, speaking about the elephant in the room, talking about what's just happened when you argued over the dishwasher. If you're not able to speak safely and express yourself, then it comes out at a weird tangent. And it's like water has to flow. And if you suppress it, then it'll squirt out and it'll create a break or a leak in a hose pipe. It'll burst it. And so that's kind of what would happen. I'd go and have a drink, a glass of wine, and I wouldn't get drunk or anything particularly, but I would then come out and it would burst onto the scene and be noisy and quite, I'd be funny. I'd be the person that said what everybody else was thinking, and I would be naughty. But sometimes I would go home and have flashes of insecurity about how flamboyant I had perhaps been. and I didn't feel like I was being me in any way, shape or form. And it's interesting because I'm often the quiet one listening now, and I don't feel suppressed either. I'm quite happy to have a conversation, and I'm quite happy to say when I need to speak, or to ask someone to just wait while I make my point. But I don't need to be heard in the same way. So in that year, as I kind of whittled down, I was looking around for the reasons. Obviously, I found my husband as a great person to blame and his mobile career. I found where I lived as a great thing to blame. I found some other things to blame. And this is how most of us operate. We operate looking for the reason that we can use to justify our situation. But when you stop, which is what I did eventually, I reached out to a 7-figure earning coach and went, what am I missing? Like, come on, I must be missing something here. And he said, well, you just haven't been deep enough. You can only take your clients as deep as you go yourself. And I wasn't earning very much money at the time. I charged quite high figures, but infrequently. And I was really annoyed because I knew what he was saying was spot on. I knew that there was obviously an element of myself. If there was any kind of discord in me, any dis-ease as they talked about in all the books I read, that was in me, and I knew I was seeing a reflection, which was irritating because it wasn't the reflection I wanted, and I knew I was going to have to do something about it. So I began a really deep dive. I stopped seeing any clients, and I made my whole focus on doing a deep dive into how we get to where we are. I wanted to know, how did I arrive here like this? A good human, definitely one of the good guys, but why was I so small? Why was my place in the world so small? Why was I not successful? Why was that like looking for a unicorn? You know, it's like it happened to other people, but not me. It's funny, I did a post actually recently and I said, do you think success is for the other people? Do you think manifestation is for the special people? Or do you think, or do you actually know it's possible for you too? And what I discovered through this deep dive, which by the way was 18 months of chewy, like confrontation, like really diving into how I got here and what does integrity really mean? Like the integrity of your life is very different to whether you've told a white lie or not, or even a bad lie. It's like, what does integrity mean when it runs right through you? What is flow? Why does that seem so elusive to people? What is manifestation even? And to discover that you're permanently manifesting. We're all expert manifestors. We're just manifesting stuff that we wouldn't consciously choose, but we're subconsciously choosing it. And then at the end of the process, I remember sitting back and it was almost like I could, the one thing I'm like really amazed by my brain, as if I'm going to talk about it objectively, because I'm like, wow, I can't believe my brain did that, is I sort of saw these different pieces and I saw an order that if they had come in, I would have accelerated more quickly than I had. I saw over the 16-year career I'd had at that point of coaching that if I had learnt this back then the next things I learnt would have made sense in a whole new way. And out of it fell this sort of curriculum of stepping stones, I suppose, of learning stepping stones that made complete sense. And I looked at it and went, oh my God, I have to share this, because what I can see here is this is how you get coded as a human being. And the coding experiences are sort of messed up because they happen to you when your brain is immature and unformed in its full capacity. And so, for example, you'll take what you know as a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old with this unformed brain. Your brain isn't fully formed till you're in your 20s, early 20s. And you'll take what happens and fit it to what you understand about the world. So, for example, if you went into school and the teacher that you adored and thought really liked you was in a real grump that day, and they aren't sharing with you because it would be inappropriate to share with a bunch of 6-year-olds that their husband left them last night or something like that, and that isn't shared information. When the teacher is grumpy with you as a 6-year-old fit that to what you know. Now, if what you know is that when people like me, they're nice, and when they don't like me, they're mean, then suddenly you will have a new idea, a new meaning, a reason that this teacher doesn't like me, and you'll look for why. And what sits there is the very basic building blocks of coding. So the first building block that we have is cause and effect. We learn that if we tip over the beaker, or like we hold it up, we can drink. We can get food up to our mouth by using our, at first it's incredibly conscious. If you look at a baby, they're wailing around, sort of like throwing their arms and legs, flailing around, not achieving anything. But slowly they begin to work out how to get their hand in their mouth, and then they work out how to get what they want. And then they'll go and do something purposeful, like put one brick on top of another, and eventually they learn to walk. So a lot of it's subconscious, but what they are learning is cause and effect. If I do this, that happens. And it's so subconscious because they're not conscious beings and their brain doesn't work properly, but it's also subconscious learning. It's so there. It's like me saying to you, hey Chris, how's the air today? And you'd be like, what? Unless it's bad or amazing, you don't notice. If I said to you, how's hair number 436? You'd be like, well, I've actually only got 300. But no, you wouldn't. But you would be like, I don't know. I'm not focused on hair number 436. And if we talk about our left toe right now, we might start to think about it because we're talking about our left toe. But prior to that, it was just there, dangling off the end of your leg, right? Or walking you down the road. So this whole process of awareness is kind of, your awareness dies down on something you've discovered. And then the next building block that comes in, through the people that are looking after you, when this can be everybody from parents to relatives to your best friends or mum to the teachers in school, and it's a process that continues right the way through to adulthood and beyond, you are learning right and wrong. Because when you do something that displeases them, they'll make it clear, particularly a parent or a caregiver of some kind or in school, they will make it clear. Now, the disapproval and the discord that you feel in that moment leaves you with an uncomfortable feeling. It's designed for your growth. It's designed for you to go, yeah, no, that's not a fit. We're not doing that. But it comes out as like, no, naughty, or don't do that. I can't believe you did this. It comes out in all different forms, from someone who'll say it really well to someone who won't say it very well at all. And in the process, we learn shame. We learn how that's something to be avoided. That doesn't feel good. So if you take a situation where the child is then feeling uncomfortable around the teacher, what's happening is the cause and effect process has happened, and they think, oh, when I can't see, I know the effect was unpleasant, and I can't see the cause, they make an assumption it's them. And they automatically put them on themselves on the wrong side of the right and wrong equation. So get to adulthood, everyone's desperate to be right and everyone's desperate to defend their position. I mean, if you walk into a class of 6-year-olds and ask them a question before they've become wary of putting their hands up, they'll all throw their hands in the air. But over the years, as they got questions wrong and they didn't like feeling uncomfortable, get to a class of 17-year-olds and walk in. Most learning environments sadly have created a room where they'll all look down. They don't want to make eye contact with you when they know you're about to ask them a question. They don't want to speak out in front of each other because it's now become dangerous. Now there's a stress response to something as simple as being asked a question by another human being.
That's profound. And I mean, there's so much there to unpick. I mean, that was your whole story there was resonating deeply with some of my own experiences, and also some other conversations that I've had on this podcast by other kind of thought leaders in this kind of space, if you like. But it's so true, that you if you ask a question and get it wrong, you're a fool for a minute. But if you don't ask that question, you're a kind of fool for a lifetime, if you like. And so many of us, we just want to keep our heads down, do the hard work, but still succeed somehow. But actually, that's not how it works anymore. We need to kind of speak up, step up. And I kind of have a saying, when you step up to life will step up to meet you.
Yeah, it will. It really does. But it takes gumption, right? I mean, it really takes something to go there, because everything in your being is saying, stay safe, stay safe.
Yeah, absolutely. And do what you've been told, do what you know is kind of feels safe. And so how do you start to unpick that programming, those codes that have been put on us by our teachers, by culture? We put it on ourselves as a kind of defense mechanism. How can we start to kind of say, hang on a minute, the real me who really knows what they want is deep down inside here. How can I shed all of this kind of this nonsense and this baggage that I've accumulated?
It's such a great question, because where do you start? How do you start? And what I realized is that ultimately, we talk about the ego, and a lot of people call the ego sort of almost something bad, like, oh, it's ego-driven behaviour. Actually, you wouldn't actually get out of bed if you didn't have an ego. So I actually quite like the ego. Just don't let it rage out of control. You know, you just keep it in check, because it can get a bit carried away with itself, but it is your friend. It is working with you, and it's ultimately the ego that's trying to keep you safe as well. For children, I've developed a children's character to help with that, but I'll come to that maybe later. But for adults, the first thing that I do is I sit down and I'm like, okay, so what's not working in your life? And it's a very similar story. I mean, everyone has their own version of events. And don't get me wrong, just because it's similar, I'm not sat there going, oh yeah, I heard this before. But what I do is I recognize that what the process fractures your relationship with yourself. So I remember years and years ago, a lady came to my office and she came to see me for weight issues. And bless her, she was very heavy. And she sat her little boy down, who was 2, on the floor. And he started to sort of crawl over to my waste paper bin. And I turned and said to her, it's literally just got paper in it, nothing else. So it's not got dirty banana skins and tea bags in there. It's just paper. She went, uh-huh. And then she turned, and as soon as he touched it, she went, naughty boy. He was a 2-year-old. There was literally nothing naughty about what he was doing. And so, I mean, in that moment, I was like, oh man, okay, let's start here. So, and actually interestingly, she came in with her mother, who was also enormous. And it's not that it's a problem being enormous. We've all got to learn to accept, and back then it was much more indicative of real problems rather than choice. But what I was very aware of was that the coding she was handing on to her child was coding that had been handed to her. And that for her weight issues were really sticking around, feeling blocked and stuck and frozen. And as your relationship with yourself gets broken down, like you go to do something and you're not being naughty, you're curious, you're interested, or, I can remember myself at school, because I had 8 different schools, which was another reason why I chose to put my son into a stable school environment, because I found that deeply disruptive. And I remember going to new schools, and things that I'd said in the previous school that were acceptable were not cool in the new school. And you'd have you'd be laughed at and teased. And so you'd kind of retreat internally a little bit and think, oh, okay. And you'd learn what the new rules were and the new ropes. And as human beings, it occurs to me like we peck each other. We peck each other to fall in line. And I used to see this a lot with weight loss. People would lose weight and they'd be like, oh, good on you for for giving it a go, well done. And women would lose a lot of weight, and they'd get to a point where they were still, maybe they'd dropped from 24 stone down to 15 stone or something, and they still needed to lose, or wanted to lose maybe another 5 stone. But at that point, all their friends would start saying, oh, you're looking ill now. I'd be like, she's not looking remotely ill, and they're like, oh, you need to stop now. Don't be getting ridiculous and all addicted to all of this. You'll be sick. You'll never, your skin will bag. And people would start, men as well, when it was the ladies losing weight, would start accusing them of looking at other men. Why do you need to be sexy? And it was so, it used to like throw me. And eventually I used to warn people that this would be coming. But what I realized when I did all this other work on myself is that when you start to shine and start to really take yourself on, other people start to feel threatened. And they're like, please don't show me how great you can be, because then I'll have to take myself on. And it's not because they don't want success for you. They do. They're just scared of not having it for themselves, and you now being fabulous and brilliant. And now they're going to have to brush their hair and like clean their own act up a little bit more. It's like simplifying it, but
But it's so true. I mean, we kind of measure ourselves against our peers and how well we're doing. And there are some people who we kind of look up to because they seem to have it sorted. They've got the good careers, the big houses and that kind of thing. And we kind of know our place in relation to them, but they also know their place in relation to us. And similarly, there are other people we always think, well, they've always been a bit of a kind of failure in that sense. So no wonder they're like this, and no wonder they've kind of got ill health, or that they just had their house repossessed. But I remember one of my best friends saying to me, because I was never someone who had much confidence, but when I started to get my confidence together, I decided I was going to fit my own kitchen. I was going to take on a big DIY project, which is a big deal for me back in those days. And I was really up for it. And I remember him saying, I told him I was going to do it, and he said to me, oh, that's a bit ambitious, isn't it? And I just remember kind of thinking, oh, you know what? He's right, actually. What am I thinking? And it put me off another year. before trying it again, and just little things like that. And we all do it. We all do it to our friends,
Yeah.
It's like,
Well, my own mother, I
yeah,
talked about trying really hard to see if I could get into a really smart university. She went, "Oh, let's be realistic." And I was like, so guess what? I didn't go to university
yeah,
because I didn't want to go to a
amazing.
crap one, but I couldn't think about a good one, sorry. So, that process I just want to make sure I've answered your question. Like, how do you begin the process? What actually has to happen is you have to restore your relationship with yourself. If you can be good to you and kind to you, then you can begin to then express that out into the world. And what I saw when I did this deep dive into myself is that I had literally trained my husband how I wanted him to treat me, even when I said I didn't want him to treat me like that. And also, I was much more defensive, and therefore, if somebody did something, I would take it very personally. It's never personal. How someone else does something says everything about them and nothing about you. Even if they're being directly mean to you, that's within their gift and their thinking and what they want to manifest and put out into the world. It doesn't mean that you are. There's an element where you will remove yourself from certain environments. And I grew up in a domestically abusive home with my stepfather as well, and he was a very violent and aggressive man, and it was terrifying at times. But coming from that place, I'm able to say that I can look back now and can see that my mother stayed because she had no confidence.
Mm.
Staying was easier than leaving. It was a lack of confidence, better the devil you know. And also, like, she was very scared that he would find her, and and it was very traumatic when she did eventually leave him. But actually, she then said, God, I should have done this years ago, once she got the appropriate support. And for a long time I was pretty angry she hadn't left him immediately. I was like, wow, I put up with that for years of my life, from 5 to 14. And then there was still a lingering presence for a while anyway, because he was the father of my brothers. It was the best training ground I could have ever had. I can now look back and be incredibly grateful for the training ground and the insights and the empathy that it's given me, and the compassion, and how I can see that you'll only stay while it serves you and suits you in some way, which sounds quite
Yeah.
controversial to say. But I understand that people need help to see this. Not that I'm like, well, you think this is your lot, so you better lie in your bed. I do not mean it like that. But what I recognize is it fitted with my mother's image of herself. It fitted that this was her life on some level. So she kind of stayed because of that. And also, you get broken down by the controlling force that you're under. And it can work both ways. There are gentlemen, suffering just as much as ladies as well. Very formal of me, isn't it? Gentlemen and ladies. There are men suffering as much as women. But it's human beings are suffering. When their relationship with themselves is fractured, that's when they think they need to take crap they wouldn't take otherwise.
There
And
is
I can remember...
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I can remember as I began to rebuild my relationship with myself, I began to ask people around me to behave differently.
It's funny that I tried to run a kind of coaching workshop. It was an abysmal failure, because I'm not really much of a coach. But I kind of had this question. There's this kind of there seems to be a nobility in suffering. There's like a pride in, like, I'm staying here and it's an awful situation, but I'm going to stick with it. And whether or not that's because we're afraid of leaping into the unknown, or we don't have the courage to actually walk out of that situation or try something new, we become very attached to that familiar suffering. But there's also a kind of stigma attached to not suffering, a kind of a shame attached to being happy, or a shame attached to being wealthy, or to not having these kind of, especially in this day and age when the cost of living is so high, when it is hard to get ahead these days. The housing market is crazy. It's costing you every people are having 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their head. So to actually think that I could be happy and wealthy and have my life sorted, there's a lot of guilt attached to that when you see other people struggling. How can we, does there come a kind of pain point? Is there a necessary pain point where we say enough is enough? And
I
is
think
that
our
a big
souls,
motivator?
yeah, I think our souls grow through adversity. Without
Yeah.
adversity, if we were all born and there were no issues and everything, like, we wouldn't grow particularly, and we might be quite self-focused. We might be, I don't know, because we don't live in that environment. And what I know is that if you look back over the last 100 years, or perhaps let's just look back over the last 30 years, and you look at the kind of, I grew up watching Carry On films, and I can't remember what that program on television was, but where the ladies used to get chased. Was it Benny Hill or
Oh,
something like
Benny
that?
Hill. Yeah.
And you'd think it was funny, and being sort of having your bottom pinched and wolf whistled at was very normal behaviour, and now it's deeply inappropriate. So we are definitely evolving, that we are waking up more and more to what works and what doesn't work, and what is appropriate and not appropriate. I do think sometimes that we've gone slightly mad with the PC-ness, that we can't laugh at ourselves, because the British particularly are so good at laughing at themselves. And I love to laugh at myself. I'll say to my husband, "Whoa, you should have seen me today. My identity was leaping around, and I was having a little moment with myself." But I'm really objective about it now, and I know that I can see that I was jumping around and got a little emotional about something. Like, no, I just want the bloody computer to work. And I'll be like that, for example, or frustrated and expressing some frustration. But very quickly, I can then laugh at me and go, wow, look at you go, Paul, going back, look at you. And I will self-soothe and say, it's okay, you've got this. Just take a moment, go make a cup of tea, or go walk around the garden, come back in, and then you'll be able to do it. And it's like that moment of being able to self-soothe is huge. Because when you can have a relationship with you don't need anybody else. So by the time my husband comes home, I don't need him to fix my bad day. Or if I do, I'll say, I need to share with you at the moment. I need to just talk. Please don't give me any solutions. For God's sake, don't fix me. I just need you to be, and he'll like, but I'm not a very good girl. I'm like, I know, but I just need to, drop it all out and tell you how frustrating my day's been. And I genuinely don't need him to fix it. Part of the process is just speaking it out. And then you're like, well, maybe I could have done this, and maybe I should have done that, and it's all comes back to the fact that it's what gets us upset is when it looks like we're at the behest of our circumstances, because then we feel powerless. When we feel disempowered, like, well, if you hadn't done that, I wouldn't have got this. If you'd come home when you said you'd come home. Those are the kind of conversations I used to have, particularly the last line, because my husband's in the military. So he comes home when the job's done, not when it gets to 5 o'clock or anything. And frequently, and for a long time, I used to eat at 10 at night. And then I'd be cross that I was a bit fat because I was eating at 10 at night. But I had the perfect choice to eat earlier. And he'll sometimes say to me, don't wait for me. I said, don't be ridiculous, darling. I ate hours ago. I'm not waiting for you. And it didn't mean that I was cooking twice. It meant that I would now, I now say, what do you want? Do you need me to put something in the fridge for you? But I don't expect myself to jump back on cooking duty, but neither am I unsupportive.
It's funny, isn't it? The culture that we live in, whether that's the culture in our marriage, the culture in society, it is designed to kind of take our power away from us. It's like, don't worry, if you're ill, the doctor will fix you. If your career isn't working, go to the career center, or the education system will not, will kind of fix that, get a degree, whatever it is. And so there's all these things, that us kind of taking our power away from ourselves. And then we kind of
do it. We put our power over there.
Well, exactly.
So
we hand it
COVID's
over.
a perfect example. Like, how are you going to keep me safe, government?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, there is a responsibility there that the role of the government is to kind of look after their people to a degree.
It is, for sure, but your immunity is your problem.
Well, exactly, and it's almost like saying, and I get it. I get that, Burger King with their supersized meals, with all of these kind of 1,000-calorie burgers, it's not healthy food. And if there's one next door to you, the temptation is going to be huge to just go there every day. But there needs to be some sort of extreme ownership of our lives, doesn't there? We have to take ownership of our, it's like, poor me, I've got diabetes and I'm morbidly overweight. And it's like, yes, okay, it has been an emotional crutch. Yes, I have used food as something that I've kind of gone to when I felt down and all these kind of things. But these are all actions that we've taken. I was bullied by my boss, and I wasn't able to set boundaries. And my boss was a bully, but at the same time, over years, my confidence had got worn down, and I allowed myself to be bullied, because one way or another. And that's not kind of blaming anyone necessarily, but it's trying to be objectively taking ownership of that situation.
So the issue comes, I mean, this is great because this is exactly where the issue comes. The issue comes when the perspective you had is just so ingrained in you, you can't see it another way. So, there is that expectation. So, I have family up in Yorkshire, and I just used to see. I don't know why I mentioned that really, but I mean the point. It was quite working class, and that's great. That's fine, and that doesn't mean anything. But it was interesting that I used to observe my grandmother's friends who'd be like, "Oh, I've been to the doctors. This is what he's told me I need to take," and I'd be like, "Okay, how about changing your food choices?" But if you have grown up and your whole world has been about this is how it works, you're brainwashed without realizing it into that this is the way it is. So even when I was growing up, and I think I'm a pretty aware person because I kept on looking at my life and looking at my life and looking at my life. Here I was in 2016, and I had no idea that I'd created the circumstances that left me so alone. I had no idea that this was a choice that fitted with the view that I had of myself deep down in my subconscious, and that what I was actually recreating was a level of unworthiness and unlovability because I'd never known my father. My father had not wanted to pay maintenance, and by the way, I say this, I have no negative views of my father at all. I get that his role in my life was profound. I get he gave me life and the rest was mine to work out. I get he could have been a better father too, but he was as good a father as he was capable of being. And I don't mean that to let him off. He's got his journey and his stuff going on. And he's still alive to this day, but he's quite a broken individual. And, life has caught up with him and he's quite sad. And I talk to him when I feel like it, and I'm not bitter in any way, but he's an alcoholic and he's very difficult to talk to and very bitter. He still calls my mother a bitch, and that's like 50 years ago. Like, dude, get over it. let it go. And he'd been married since. So it's like, where can I be responsible? That's essentially where I got to. Like, I rang that coach and I was like, tell me what I'm missing. What am I missing about my life? And in that deep dive, I saw I'd created a life to fit with the idea that I had built as a child, that, my father's not around. I know he doesn't pay maintenance because I've heard my mother going on about this. I know my mother is struggling. And then my mother invites a poor relationship in because that works for her because of what's going on with her self-esteem and her self-worth. And I'm sure that was all fixed to having a pregnancy too young and running away with me, and it was all probably part of the ingredients that go into the pot. And essentially what I can see is that there's this view that was so hidden from my view. I felt defensive of me, like, don't you talk to me like that. But now if somebody speaks rudely to me, I will say, I don't really understand what your tone is. Are you okay? Do you need, if I don't know them? And if I do know them, I'm like, why are you speaking to me like that? Why are you being aggressive? Can you just reframe it? Because I'm struggling to listen to what you're saying. Here's a great quote. I can't hear you because how you're being is so loud. Yeah, it's really great, that one. And when people are being aggressive, it's like, I actually had somebody come to the door recently. I'm in a military quarter, and he was shouting about the leaves that were falling off the trees and the trees that were hanging over. And in the end I said, why are you shouting at me? I'm not the landlord and I'm not responsible for them, but I'll definitely help you. But you've got to stop shouting so I can hear what you're saying and understand your problem. Now, take me back 20 years or 15 years. In fact, take me back to 2016, 6 years ago. I would have probably got quite hot under the collar at the way he was speaking, because you're defending yourself. Why does this happen to me? Why are people rude to me? I can't believe it coming round here. Who does he think he is? All that sort of stuff's running around your head. Now I can see there's a man in pain that can't communicate very well. And if I calm him down, because I understand that how he's being has got nothing to do with me, that's because he probably feels aggrieved that stuff never works out for him in some way, and that this house next door is taking liberties in some way because it's not a military house, and who are these people that live in it and just come and go and whatever his view is. I don't know what his view is, and that's what I get. I don't know what's making you this way, but I know it's not okay to talk to me. And had he not calmed down, which by the way he did, I would have said, I'm going to go inside. When you've calmed down and you can tell me what the problem is, I'll have a conversation with you, but I'm not doing it like this. And I would have said, I say things like, I'm so sorry that you're so upset, and I really want to hear you, So I'm not antagonistic. I'm not like, if you don't, pull yourself together, I'm not talking to you. I'm very kind because I can see it's them that's in pain, not me. There's nothing for me to defend because I have a good relationship with me and I know I'm okay.
That takes a lot of practice, a lot of courage. I mean, not everyone is born like that. I
Well, I
remember,
wasn't either, just to
well,
be fair.
I know, but you've clearly done the work. I remember, like, I can't remember who it was who said it, but someone said, if you have a dog that bites you and it continues to bite you and you do nothing about that, then the relationship is the dog's job is to bite you and your job is to get bitten. And so if that man was to come and shout on your doorstep and you would go, oh, I'm sorry, then that is what your job becomes. Him is to when he's angry, he goes and shouts at everybody. And when people are angry, you kind of recoil and shrink. And similarly, it's a kind of a good, strong metaphor for life. When life bites us, are we going to just stand there and be bitten? When things aren't working out for us, are we going to continue to let those things not work for us? Or are we going to do something? Are we going to try and change that relationship with life? Go, get rid of the dog, get a cat instead, that kind of thing.
Oh my goodness, dogs all over the place.
Oh, I know. It's like cats and dogs.
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
and here's the other thing. We're even more powerful than that, Chris. It's like when my life, because listen, I'm a human being. So life doesn't always go the way I'd like it to. But what's really exciting for me now, I'm like, ooh, what am I projecting out now? Which part of me still wants to work on this? I'm like, I get to know that I own it. All I'm seeing is a reflection. So if somebody's rude and I keep putting myself in places where people are rude, where do I keep choosing to go? And why is that working for me on some level?
that's kind of a radical objectivity, isn't it? But all the time, it's until you get to that point, train yourself to get to that point, kind of come to that kind of place and that relationship with yourself. It's very easy to say, oh, why are people so mean to me all the time? Why is it always other people who get the luck? I'm just as good as him, but I'm not as good as him, that kind of weird thing. And it's very easy to kind of say life is unfair, life sucks, oh, I am so unlucky. But how can
We're
we
not, we're not taught to be responsible for ourselves. You
so
see, as
how
you
do we
said,
how do we
you
how do
literally
we
said that the government and we're in this sort of nanny state where we have all these expectations. So, for example, my father has cancer. My stepfather now, second stepfather, and we adore him. And as a result, we took the measures to protect him, but we didn't expect the rest of the country to lock down for him. We locked him down. Like
yeah
we got it, and we feed his immune system, and we pour in the good food, and we keep him in the place where he needs to be for his immunity.
but how do we get to a point where we kind of say, hang on a minute, maybe it's not life that's being cruel to us, maybe it's us and the things that we're doing and our narratives, our patterns, the continued negative behaviors or belief structures that they're not working for us. But yeah, here we are blaming. How can we turn that magnifying glass on ourselves? What's the motivation for that?
Well, I think perhaps one of the best ways to explain this would be to tell you a little story. So when I was like doing this deep dive and I was working with different companies and organizations, different courses and programs, essentially, on one of the particular programs, we had to, we didn't have to, but the process we put ourselves through was doing some presentations. And every time we did a presentation, we had a few measures to meet to ensure we could present as cleanly as possible. And they taught me so much about what's going on in our heads and how what's going on in your head comes out. So, for example, if you're presenting and someone in the front row is sort of like looking at you like this, you might start having thoughts like, I don't know if this will be seen. So what I'm talking about, someone with a grumpy look on their face. You might have a thought like, oh God, he thinks my talk is crap. And what happens is you begin to become, it's like a brain worm, it begins to run you. So the whole process was to show us how to get out of the way of ourselves. So the presentations were something they invited us to do as part of the program, but they were an exercise to expose your thinking. And one of the things that I consistently forgot to do was fix up this little tiny call that you're supposed to have an hour before your presentation. You're supposed to have a 5-minute call to make sure, like, has anything happened to get in the way? And the day before you had like a proper call about it that was longer, and the day of you had this 5-minute, like nothing's, you haven't just spilt coffee down your top or anything, like, and they wouldn't ask those sorts of questions. They'd be like, right, everything good? and you would be like, yeah, everything's great, I feel really well prepared. Or you'd be like, oh my God, I've just had a message from my son's school. Now I'm like really got half a brain. And you would deal with it. They were there to help you deal with your circumstances. And I consistently forgot to book that 5-minute call. And booking everything was my responsibility. It was my responsibility to run the presentation, to get the guests there, and to book all the moving parts of it. And it was an exercise in responsibility and integrity in your life. And I remember there was this particular lady who I used to not particularly enjoy dealing with, because I found her quite ferocious. She was quite confronting for me, because she would just say it how it was, you know. And so she was actually one of my greatest teachers. And when I contacted the person you had the 5-minute call with, I said, I'm so sorry, I forgot to book my 5-minute call. She said, well, I can't do it. You'll have to organise it with someone else. I was like, oh no, who can I organise it with? And she gave me a list of 3 names. And the woman who I most feared was on that list. And guess who the person was that said, I can sort you out? It was her. And when I contacted her and we had the call, she said, okay, do you want to talk to me about how you've ended up forgetting this? And it was never done in a shame-filled way. That was part of the process. You just had to acknowledge the impact it was having on you and the impact it was having on other people. So I said, let me just acknowledge the impact this has had, that you've had to take some time out. You've had to leap to you know, you had to kind of get that you had caused a disruption for someone else. You didn't come with your excuses, and you didn't say sorry. You were not expected to say sorry, because it wasn't an exercise in shaming you. It was an exercise in you acknowledging what happens when this stuff goes on. So I acknowledged the impact on her, and then you have to acknowledge the impact on you. And so I said, and I'm quite stressed now because I've had to book this on, you know, I'm driving and I'm trying to pull over and book it. And now I'm going to be, I'm worried I'm going to be late. I'm actually much closer than I thought I was. So it's okay. But still, I went through that process. And she's like, great. And she said, and thank you for saying all of that, but that's actually bullshit. And I was like, oh God, here we go. Shark attack. She's going to get me. And she said, the reason you do it, Polly, is you're doing so well and everything runs so well. It's just another way for you to remind yourself that you're actually a bit of a tosser.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
so self-sabotage, basically. Yeah.
It hit me. Now, let's just look at that through normalize. Normalize would be not someone who's taking themselves on, not trying to grow that awareness. It's like, oh, bloody hell, the kids this morning, and I couldn't get out of the house, and the traffic, and we've got all these reasons that we look outside. But, you know, I have my own coaching group this evening. And one of my coachees, and I told her this very story, which is why it's fresh in my mind, said, the one area that I'm really struggling with is my own self-care. And then I get so cross with myself because I'm not looking after myself properly. I'm like, ooh, double whammy then. Not only do you take yourself down and self-sabotage yourself, but then you beat yourself up for it. What a great way of keeping you from your relationship with yourself. What a great way of continuing the beating up of you. And she's done so well in so many other areas. And she was like, she's now, and this is what happens. You kind of fix all the other things that are going on, but you'll be the last person that you'll fix it with. And she's at that stage in the program where she's like, oh. I'm like, yeah, this is your way of maintaining a shitty vibe for you and of reminding yourself you're not all that and then some, which is exactly what I was doing with that presentation. It was a way of taking myself down, just reminding myself, you could be great, maybe. One day, someday, but not today.
I used to, I have a kind of weird relationship with failure that has kind of haunted me my whole life. And it kind of, it appears in my life as if I don't try, I can't really fail. So, you know, there is this kind of thought that I could be brilliant, but I could also fall flat on my face. So if I don't really try, then, you know, I'll be mediocre, but at least I won't have failed, not properly failed anyway. And I think a lot of people do this. You know, we're all capable or potentially capable of such great things, but we do kind of think, well, you know, maybe I'll just kind of rein it in or do something. And then I can say, well, you know, it didn't work out, but I didn't really try, or I didn't book the pre-call, or I didn't, you know, do all of these kind of things. So it's not really, okay, I'm not kind of living the life I dreamt of, but that's okay because
it's actually a phenomena.
Yeah.
There's a brilliant book, I don't know if you've read it, by Matthew Syed, and it's called Black Box Thinking. It's a brilliant book, and it's he's got the most wonderful voice to listen to if you do it on Audible as well. So anyone out there, this is a top book recommendation. And it starts off with this really chewy story of a medical situation, which I'm not going to, no spoilers here, but essentially he goes on and talks all the way through the book about how we fear failure. And and I'm so sorry to say this, because obviously all the NHS, they do such a great job. Let me just preempt what I'm about to say with that. But the most dangerous business in the world is the medical business, because they will cover up mistakes because someone's career depends on it. And when I say cover up, they're not necessarily manipulation, but it's like, oh, well, it's just one of those things. And it just happened, or, oh, well, you know, because it's usually someone's neck on the line, and they are getting better at this. And in fact, this book and the particular scenario at the beginning of the book is one of the turning points. And the safest industry in the world is the airline industry, because every single mistake has been recorded on that black box. And what they do is they take a mistake, because people have often paid with their life, and they break it apart and look at it from every angle. They retrain the pilots, they rebuild aeroplanes and put other new parts into them to avoid the same mistake occurring again. And essentially, the whole point is that we are so scared of our mistakes, because it goes back to what we were saying right at the beginning. We're terrified of being wrong. We're so scared of it, we'll do anything to be right. And we'll use the external to blame, because it's so scary. There are three fundamental concerns we have in life. The first one is, am I safe? And this is when you're a baby. And we know that babies know if they're safe or not, because sometimes, whilst they will cry, we also know there are circumstances in which a baby will stop crying because it understands that's creating a lack of safety. So am I safe is the first thing a human being when they're born needs to understand. Safety gets covered, but it's a big issue whilst you're a child and young and little and small. The next awareness that comes in is, am I loved? And we know the brain literally develops differently if we're not loved, and we don't see affection when we're growing up. But it's a really important concern, and we really process this one. This is before you're 2. You're processing that one. And then the last one that comes in is, am I enough? Now, it doesn't sound like any of those, because it's not the way we're processing it when we're that young, but it's what we are processing. It's an essence that we understand, an awareness we have. And to this day, you could be arguing about the dishwasher, but what you're really arguing is about one of those three. And so the way it will look is that the conversation and the arguments we have are not the actual issues that are bothering us. So it will sound like, bloody hell, I told you not to put the glasses in the dishwasher like that. What's really being said is, why do you never listen to what I say? I don't feel enough because you seem to not notice what I'm saying. And then the other person will respond is, oh, they get clean, it's fine, I'll dry them if they're wet in the morning. For goodness sake, you make such a fuss. Now, the subtext there is, please don't point out my inadequacies, because I don't feel enough. And what both is being driven in their lack of enoughness is like, don't point out I'm not enough, because if I'm not enough, you won't love me. Don't discover my lack of enoughness, for God's sake, because then you won't love me. And if you don't love me, well, then I'm not safe, because I'll get thrown out of the tribe. And that's that safety which is so primevally built into us, you know, and literally controls our behaviour to the point that we'll argue about the way the dishes are in a dishwasher. And listen, can I just say, I'm a horror around the dishwasher. But the difference is, instead of bitch at my husband about it, I just wait till he's left the room and then I reorganise it.
And I'm sure there's plenty we could unpick in that one as well.
Yeah, yeah, literally. And that's my perfectionism as well, which is an old habit that I have to watch.
But this is really, I mean, this is something that's come up in various conversations I've had. I did a conversation a couple of years ago now, and it was about happiness. And one of my guests was saying that, you know, they were having this high profile career, but they were also coming home to feed the children and all that kind of stuff and cook dinner. But they didn't realize that they were dishing up dinner with a side order of stress and anxiety, because they were also holding down this kind of high profile job and all of this kind of stuff. And then someone else said, you know, we hold on to all this kind of emotional trauma, and it ends up coming out sideways. Either we kind of end up snapping at someone, or we become an alcoholic, or we, you know, develop these strange illnesses, headaches, migraines, stomach problems, you know, backaches and all that kind of stuff. I'm reading a book at the moment called I think it's called The Mind-Body Prescription, which is all about chronic pain and how often that is a result of kind of unhealed trauma and that kind of thing. I mean, does there come a point where we turn around and say, oh, my life is so awful, there's got to be something I can do to change myself? Where does that kind of objectivity and self-awareness come from if we don't have it to begin with?
So I think that's exactly when people come. That's usually where my clients are when they first introduce themselves to me or reach out. You get to a point where you're like sick of your own shit.
Yeah.
You're just sick of the repetition of the same old noise and nonsense, and you're like, do you know what? Enough. And I think it's one of the bravest things we can do when we reach out for help. It's one of the bravest things to do. So I just don't get my life. I just don't understand. And there is no shame if I hadn't reached out for help and I hadn't done all the studying I'd done, I wouldn't understand what I know now. And so it's a process of just working out, like, do the deep dive into you, do the work. There are some brilliant books out there. You don't have to go on expensive courses. It's a longer journey alone, for sure. It's far quicker if you have a mentor in life. And I'm not sort of saying that as a sales pitch. I don't mean it like that. I mean, your mentor could be a great friend or someone whose life is really working. Get curious about why you're reacting the way you're reacting. Read books. And, there's a great book. It's here. It's called How to Do the Work by Dr. Nicole LePera. How to Do the Work. It's a great book. Read books like that and start to dive into, because by the way, you talked about the fact that these things will come up as autoimmune disorders, cancer now 1 and 2. I mean, jeepers, right? And literally it's you chewing yourself alive on some level. You really do want to get down and dirty with what's going on and what your thinking is, because you're a manifestation. You're living in your own hologram. How your life is being, like my entire marriage is a totally different marriage today. Same man. And he still can annoy me. But what I recognize is this. Sometimes he opens his mouth and he pushes air over his vocal cords. And sometimes I really like those sounds. Sometimes I want to smack him around the head with a frying pan. But only ever because of what I make those sounds mean. It's what I make it mean. Sometimes I can look at him and go, wow, that's an opinion and a half. And I just don't let it land. It literally rolls off me. And other times I can get a bit like, oh, you're not listening. And what I'm really good at now is recognizing when I start to lose my cool is that I say to him, I got to walk away. I just need to walk away. I'm not being balanced in this conversation. I'm in the way of myself. I'm feeling defensive or I'm feeling shitty. Let me just walk away. And, sometimes it's nice to snap at someone because it feels good and say, would you just bog off? Just leave me alone. But what I'm great at, if I have ever done that, is at saying, do you know what? Thank you so much for giving me the space earlier. I was really feeling a bit itchy and twitchy inside and I needed to just get down with what it was. And occasionally, because I spend my day giving myself to other people and like leading them through their situation, occasionally I've discovered I just needed a bit of me time.
Yeah.
Just needed to be with Polly with nothing else coming in. Just sit and be, read a book, watch a crappy program, whatever it is. I just needed some me time. And then I can be, then I've got space for someone else. That might be why I'm feeling a bit, and it's learning how to ask for what you need without there being blame as well. And learning to understand that other people's needs exist. And here's the big thing that really changes life as well. 2 of you can have an opposing opinion or an opposing desire that will clash with each other, and you can both be valid.
Yeah, and I think that is really because we're always trying to be right. And often we'll see that as the other person having to be wrong, but it's not necessarily.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or we're trying to be, our need is like express why our need is more important than theirs.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that can leave you very, because then you'll cobra with each other about whose need is greater.
Yeah,
How
and
about both being equally valid?
You see it a lot, who's especially in parenting as well. You see kind of, because roles are slightly different, as much as both parties can be generally trying to be the best they can be and most hands-on they can be. People have different needs, they have different responsibilities. The child will prefer one parent for different things than the other parent. And so you kind of assume different roles. But also because of that, you have different stresses as well. And it can be very easy to fall into that whole kind of, well, you don't understand because I have to do this and I have to do that. And that's really difficult. And then the other person says, well, I have to do this. And that's even more difficult, and actually those are different things and they're all very difficult. So just, leave it at that, stop trying to win this kind of battle of who's got it worse, that kind of thing.
100%. And I think that moment that occurred to me, that we could both have valid needs, was an amazing moment. You know, I remember a particularly painful situation after my son was born, and we went to a funeral, and we were really uncomfortable with where we were staying, and I was really cross. I was in this mouldy bathroom trying to change my 3-week-old baby on a mouldy windowsill, and I was just so angry that we'd been put in this situation. And I remember my husband saying, "You're so selfish. We're at a funeral, for God's sake." And it was a difficult funeral to be at, because it was of a child. And I was being told I was selfish, but I was a new mum. I was emotionally a bit all over the place anyway, because at 3 weeks you're having the big drop. But also I didn't want my new baby on a mouldy windowsill. And both our needs were valid. Both of them were valid. And we just didn't know how to express ourselves at the time. And I think, you know, my husband has been one of those greatest teachers. And learning to communicate my needs to him without making it that he has to do something different has been really liberating. And the conversations now are, so I need to have a chat with you. I just want to let you know that I'm not expecting anything from you, but this isn't working for me.
Yeah.
And he'll go, "Oh, okay. What do you need?" I'm like, "I don't know, I'm working it out at the moment." And I know I remember one particular conversation when he was never around through COVID, and I was juggling and spinning all the plates at home, and my whole business had moved online, and homeschooling was happening, and yet he's running around building hospitals for other people, and I'm like, "Oh God, I could really do with some support at home." And I said to him, and then it went on for a really long time where there was just no support for me at all. And I said, "Just to let you know, this totally isn't working for me, but I get that you're very busy, and I get you're doing your thing, but it isn't working." And he said, "Okay, what do you need?" I said, "I think I need to be with other people. I think I need to be supported." He's like, "Well, what does this look like for us then?" I'm like, "Possibly that I'm going to go away for a bit, maybe go home and take some respite, you know, work out a way to get what it is I need." And it didn't, like, previous conversations, previous situations would have sounded like, "You're such a bastard, you're never around, you never think of your family, you never do this, you never do that." That's how it would have been once before. But he's not a bastard. He's working his tits off for everybody else. You know, he was doing the best he could and juggling himself. So it's like, okay, I got it. You're doing what you're doing, and I'm doing what I'm doing. And, you know, it then trickled down into the little stuff. So one of the things that he loves to do is watch a film he's seen before, because he can just switch off. And it just lets the TV, because everyone's always wanting something from him. He's always the one in charge at work. Everybody wants a piece. So he needs to watch something that's not going to challenge him. And I'm like, "Oh my God, please don't make me watch a film I've seen before." So the way that would be, like, what are we going to watch? Well, I quite like to watch a film I've seen before, or I like to watch something easy. And that's what he says. "I like to watch something easy." I know what that means. I'm like, yeah, that's not going to work for me tonight. And then he'll say, "Well, it doesn't work for me for you to bog off if you're thinking about going off and having a bath or something. How about we find something that's easy for us both, that you could watch, that maybe I haven't seen for a long time, or I've seen but you haven't, or it's a new program. And we'll work it out. We compromise. Both our needs are valid." Or he'll sometimes say, "Okay, what do you want to do?" And I'll be like, "Do you know what? I feel like a bath, and I'll read my book." And he'll be like, "Okay, you sure that's okay?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's fine by me." We're both getting our needs met. It doesn't have to be a fight, but it's always a fight when you feel hard done by it, when you feel someone's doing something to you, and when you feel something's been taken from you. But that's down to you and your relationship with yourself. And learning how to do that is a process. You know, I just want to say that people might be like, "Oh God, I want to learn how to do that." And I'm not sat here saying, "Oh, you've got it all wrong, people." I had to learn how to restore my relationship with myself and learn how to give Polly what she needed. And when I learned how to do that, I stopped so kind of wailing about it. I stopped moaning and blaming, and I started to go, "Oh, I can ask for what I want, and people will hear me." Well, it didn't always go smoothly, but, you know, it's a process.
Do you think, I mean, you went through that year where you were on your own, and it was pretty, you know, you came face to face with yourself, and that was quite a kind of a brutal experience. And we have a lot of things in our lives that kind of stop us doing that. You know, a lot of people are kind of afraid of meditating because they don't want to kind of listen to what their mind is going to tell them when they're not watching the TV or checking their email or that kind of thing. They don't want to go in there because they're scared that it's going to be a hornet's nest of trauma and repressed memories and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, I went, you know, people go on retreats, you know, people go on Vipassana retreats where they go, you know, 10 days or a month of not speaking. And they're putting themselves in that situation. And there's talk of a thing called a Vipassana facelift, where people come out of that experience looking 10 years younger because they've kind of come out and they've worked through it all, just in this kind of really horrible mental place. I went through, when I was going through a hard time, I ended up as a van driver delivering groceries for a supermarket. And I was there for a year thinking, how the hell did I get here? But also, when you're a van driver, there's a lot of solitude. You're driving hour after hour and you've only got your own thoughts. And I did a lot of kind of difficult but good work in that time, and wrote furiously in a notebook. Do you think with the COVID lockdowns that there have been more people having to come to face with themselves, and that is kind of creating a subtle shift in the culture, if you want to call it that?
100%. Literally wrote an article on this the other day. When military people go on tours, I'm just going to use this as an example. They used to come back and there used to be all sorts of problems because they just came back and life carried on, but they weren't in that space. And interestingly, I've actually done a tour myself when I was working as a Defence Medical Welfare Officer many years ago, and I went out to Iraq and worked in the field hospital in Shaiba Airfield. And when I got back, I remember feeling very removed from my environment, and it all seemed like there was a lot of stuff here after living very simply out of one bag with a bed and very basics that you needed to get through the day. And when we went to a wedding, I remember thinking it was very over the top. It was nice to be there, but as they said their vows, my husband my husband to be squeezed my hand, and I was like, yeah, can they hurry up? I'm a bit hungry. I was so emotionally removed from the process. And what they do, just to bring it back to the COVID, is that when you come back off a tour, they reintegrate you. They take the time to acknowledge that you've become a different person, you've operated differently, life has changed, and they reintegrate you gently. So, part of the process for military personnel is that they'll maybe stop them off in Cyprus and they give them a couple of days off there, but in with the people that they've been away with. So they all start to breathe again and relax. And then they take them from there back into the camp situation, but they make them go to work for the next 2 weeks. They don't just send them off on leave. You've got to keep working in camp so that you're coming home, but you're both so excited to see each other. All you want to do is be together, but then they go back to work and it doesn't overwhelm you. Because what they found was when they just put you back in the situation that you'd previously been in, people were having domestic abuse went up, arguments went up, divorces went up, because the woman or the person, the spouse that had been left at home had expanded into the home and had learnt to do everything for themselves. And then suddenly there was another human dropping towels on the floor and having moving stuff and saying, well, this is how it was when I was here last. And we're like, whoa, hang on, you've been gone for 6 months. And they understood that you needed to go through a kind of mental process. And this great resignation that we're seeing at the moment is that people had the shock, we were in shock when we got sent home. It was apocalyptic out there. It seemed so weird going for a walk and there was no one around, no cars, and I remember feeling excited actually at first lockdown because I didn't have to go to London every day. This was cool and new and I got to be at home. And then I learnt that, we've learnt to see a cat wandering across a screen is not a crime. And we've learnt that, I tell you what I learnt that I don't need an office. I can sit here and Zoom my people. I don't need to suddenly throw myself around. They don't need to throw themselves across London to get to me. And now, here I am 2 and a bit years later with clients in LA and clients in New York and clients in London. It doesn't really matter where they're coming from. It just matters what time the Zoom call is. And so I can get a bit zoomed out, but that's a separate issue. The point that I'm making is that when we suddenly expected everyone to go back, we didn't acknowledge that they had perhaps been through something. Some people were suffering from grief. Marriages had fallen apart. So there was another form of grief. We didn't acknowledge that there'd been a shift and that also people had learnt to be in a situation where they were working, but nobody saw if they also put a wash on. And it wasn't a crime if they did do that. So they got to manage their life a little bit better. Some people got a bit fatter, but lots of people got thinner as well because they suddenly could look after themselves and they didn't have the commuting stress. And suddenly we saw there was a different way of doing things. Now, when we just go back, the companies that are doing well are the ones that are actually acknowledging you've been through something. Let's slowly reintegrate, or maybe let's change the way we do business to fit with something that better works for you. And it's interesting because if you look at the, I read about this recently, and it's kind of like it's the workability of motherhood. New mums are exactly the people that weren't getting employed, but not like previously. I mean, like, oh my God, a new mum. No, she's going to have children. Let's not employ her. But is exactly the person that they should employ. She's the person that was learning to adapt. They're the people that really dig out. It's like a woman with children is the woman that will get a job done. Or even a home dad with children will get a job done. And we've got to reissue our thinking on this. We've got to readjust it. But yes, I absolutely think that one of the reasons people are leaving and setting up their own businesses or struggling and mental health has gone through the roof is because we suddenly had a long, hard look in the mirror. It's almost like COVID sent us home to have a think. And yeah, we now need to do things differently. The world wasn't working as it was anyway. It was stressful. It was busy. We couldn't think straight. We were pulled from pillar to post. Yeah, we need to do things differently. And it's where that's not getting addressed that the problems are perpetuating.
So if we were to kind of sum up in kind of 3 bits of advice, I've been trying to kind of connect things in my head. There's a bit, there's a bit like, there is. And I'm just thinking, if we want to, basically what you're saying is our life is a reflection of our kind of inner state, if you like. It's all the kind of beliefs that may be working for us, but also may not be working for us, all the kind of successes and the failures and the things that make us uncomfortable, all of those kind of things. And there seems to be a kind of a requirement for kind of brutal, objective self-awareness, but at the same time with no kind of judgment attached. It needs to be completely, okay, you are letting yourself down here, but don't attach any shame to that. Just see this as the obstacle and then go about fixing it. Yeah, be gentle.
You're not gonna transform overnight, but if you just get that you're the common denominator in all the things that don't work in your life, and you just get that that's going on, and just go, right, what can I do by working on your relationship with yourself and seeing how you're always present when it's not working out for you, you'll begin to start the process of taking responsibility. But please get that it doesn't mean you're a dick. It doesn't mean that you're some tosser that didn't work it out right, that you're part of your conditioned programming, and that you just got a bit of dodgy coding. And there are so many different ways. Like if you want to code in how to get to number 9 on a computer, there are so many different ways you can get to the number 9. You can go to 100 and minus off, a big figure, or you can add lots of ones together, or you can do 3 times 3. And everyone has got a different way of getting there. So just get that how you got to where you are is through the circumstances and things that occurred to you, and you fitted it to what you knew with your immature and underdeveloped brain. And it's not your fault. It's just something that hasn't been explained to you yet. So get down with why you're the common denominator, and what do you think you keep recreating in your life that you'd now like to deal with. So I would say that's number 1.
Okay. And then just start to unpack it and fix it. So
if number 1 is starting to understand, like if you just acknowledge you're the first, you're the person that's on the scene all the time, that's the first process. The second process would be to know that you're not at fault. That nobody's to blame here. Stuff that's happened that hasn't been great is all part of the process anyway. There's a wonderful book actually that I could recommend, another one, which is The 5 People You Meet in Heaven. And there's a guy in that book called Eddie who has an accident right at the front end of the book, goes to heaven, and then meets a bunch of people that he didn't expect to meet. It wasn't like just his mum, his dad and his brother or anything like that. And what he finds, he died saving a little girl in an accident. So there's a follow-on book about her life because Eddie died saving her. But when he goes to heaven, he kind of meets all the people that played a part in his growth and his life. And it's really fascinating because the impact it had on me actually was that the next time I was driving somewhere in a hurry and Miss Daisy was in front of me and I was like, oh man, can you just get out of the way? You're like 30 miles an hour in a 60. I was able to take a deep breath and go, okay, you've got some role in my life here. And I started to just see that there is far more working for you than there is working against you. And if you just gain some height to look at the big picture, you'll start to see that everything isn't against you or isn't, set to challenge you. The universe doesn't test you. You create circumstances, and you are in an environment where how you deal with something is down to you. So it's like a process of empowering yourself to just see, not to blame, but to empower yourself. Like when shit goes wrong for me, I am so empowered. I might not like it, but I'm like, right, what can I get from this? Like, what can I be responsible for here? There's always something. So instead of feeling like a victim of my circumstances, I'm now in control of them but not in a control freaky way. I just get that I played a part in it, so I can empower myself to do something different. And here's the thing that I would say to everybody that's listening. You are a magnificent, wonderful human, capable of anything you want. You just don't know it yet. And, you know, if you come from that place of that there's way more possible for you than you've ever believed, the conversation I have is with people's hearts, not their heads. Your heart knows you're great. It's your head that tries to keep you small and rationalize and go from what you think you know. So yeah, those are the process is begin the process of doing the deep dive. Don't blame yourself, and know that it's always you that's there as the first one. This will begin the turning of the tide.
I mean, a lot of this is about undoing some of the programming that we've kind of adopted from childhood. And briefly, I mean, we could just mention your books that you've, or is it the Grumpet?
Yeah. So I made this character up for my son when he, and for years with my own smallness, my friends were like, this is great. We've been using it at home with baby Jack or whatever. And I'd be like, oh, well, they would say that. They're my friends, aren't they? But actually, when I was doing the sort of expanding myself and really learning, like, what does it take for Polly to be really nice to Polly? One of my course leaders said, so we're going to do a community project, and what do you want to do? And I was like, I suppose I'll do a military wife project. And I remember getting home that night and thinking, I don't want to do anything with the military. My whole life is run by the military. I do not want to do anything for them. And I was like, maybe I should do that character and find out if it really has got legs. So I went back to her and she went, this is great. This feels much more energetic. She said, but there must be a community element. So I want you to take it into schools and see if it's got legs in schools. And I was like, you want me to do what? So the first thing I did was on the military patch, I asked if there were any school teachers, and there was a bunch of primary school teachers, and I sat them all down and I explained what the Grumpet was. And basically the Grumpet is this lovely soft fur ball that loves you so much, but he's got the best ears, eyes and nose in the whole world. And all he does is look, sniff and listen for how your day is going. And if he sees anything new or different or scary, he goes all spiky and he runs around inside of you and gives you those funny feelings. And I described it like this. And then I was like, and so basically what happens is you then ask the child to use their ears, eyes and nose to establish whether it's really scary or just seems scary. And then they communicate with their Grumpet. And there was just this tumbleweed silence. And I was dying inside like, oh my God, they think I'm a knob. I should not have said this to them. And then one of them spoke up and just said, this is genius. Every character that currently exists, you have to identify with it, like mild Mark, shy Susan, boisterous Ben, whatever the character the traits of the character are, you must identify with it. But the difference with your Grumpet is we've all got one. And your Grumpet is a reflection of how you're feeling. Now, taking it into schools was the next thing. Having been told I wasn't completely bonkers, I can now take it into schools, and we did some free workshops in different schools across the south and southwest of England, and visited loads. And what we found was that I found a student who was on a design course at like Cleveland College of Art and Design. A friend of mine was there and said, oh my God, please give this to one of my students to design your Grumpet. And so the Grumpet got designed, and we did some basic sketches, and we got them cut in colour and printed these boards, and I would hold them up as I was telling the story. And children were just enraptured by it. It wasn't just my son and my mates' kids. Kids were like, and like loving the idea of this Grumpet, that they all had their own. And we'd hand out a black and white colouring in page, and they'd colour in their own, they'd give it a name, and my Grumpet's called this. And it was really interesting. And then the teachers began to give me feedback and say, right, well, this would show me that this child is happy at the moment, and this one would give me cause for concern because of the way the Grumpets have been coloured in. And then it moved on to, suddenly there was a side effect we didn't see coming, and that it gave an opportunity for children with various special needs who struggle to communicate how they're feeling, a voice. And they all began to say, like, I had one teacher come up to me and she said, that child doesn't talk. And this child had gabbled the whole way through, busily chatting about his Grumpet, and was really engaged. It made me cry. She was crying, and that made me cry. And I was just like, oh my God, it's given a child who can't normally communicate their needs. Because instead of saying to a child, pull yourself together, what's going on with you today? They don't understand it's them. But if you said, what's the matter with your Grumpet? They're able to be objective about it. And then they can suddenly start talking. Now, the point of this is that if we can begin our relationship with ourself, which is what you're doing when you're talking to your Grumpet, you're self-soothing when you're telling your Grumpet it's okay. and that you've looked and that you've checked and you've asked an adult and, you know, and so on. You are then learning to build that relationship with yourself. The sooner we do that, the less fractured we'll be later. And we all have grumpets in our household. That's exactly what I will say is like, whoa, my grumpet kicked off today. And then we'll all kind of laugh about it. And my son, who I made this up for when he was just 4, is 15 now. Almost on the 1st of May. So he's 15. And so he tends to not talk about his grumpets so much, but his emotional intelligence is way beyond most of his peer group because he has an understanding of how to communicate with himself. He has an understanding of how to reassure.
It reminds me a lot of a practice called RAIN, which I've talked about on the podcast before, which they talk about in kind of mindfulness and psychotherapy. It's just a kind of practice of being aware of your emotional state and investigating it and that kind of thing. And by the time you've gone through the process, you so I think it's recognize, accept, investigate, and nurture. And by the time you get to it, you've kind of soothed yourself. You know, you start off, I'm angry. I recognize I'm angry. I accept I'm angry. So why am I angry? I'm investigating that, and then I'm going to nurture that. And it feels very much like that, but on a kind of much more simplistic level for kind of
try
younger
telling
minds.
To a 4-year-old, right? They're like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
They don't even understand the word nurture. So it's a really great way to begin it very early on. And the earlier we begin this process, the more ingrained it becomes as a behaviour. So I now have schools that have adopted the grumpet and are grumpet schools. And we've done a white paper on it. And the book is called Harry and the Big Scary Slide. It's the grumpet, Harry and the Big Scary Slide, and it's PIT at the end. So like you're grumpy with IT on the end, because we talk about it being our ego, don't we? So it was the grumpet. And yeah, there's big plans for the grumpet, I've got to tell you.
Fantastic.
But the other there's no other books, but I do want to do a series, and I will do an adult book one day. I think it's going to be called something like The Being in the Human.
Well, that's brilliant, because I was going to say I wish that I'd had the grumpet when I was growing up, and like what could I have now instead, you know? So there's an adult book in the kind of works is brilliant. So
yeah, there is. And I mean, the thing perhaps to leave people with when you're curious about yourself is how you are being is not who you are. So you could be being aggressive, you could be being maybe a bit of a dick, you could be being shy, you could be being whatever you're being. It's not who you are. Who you are is brilliant, but how you're being is an expression of how you're feeling. And, you know, when you learn to be how you want to be, that will change what you have. But most of us come from, well, when I have this, then I will be happy. You can be happy earlier. You just got to work on how you're being.
So if people want to find out more about the grumpet and the kind of more grown-up work that you do, and just kind of dig into a bit more about what you're offering the world, where is the good place for them to start off?
Yeah, so the grumpet has his own website, bless him. He's very grown up now, so it's just thegrumpet.com. And you'll see my story on there. You'll see a picture of me and Harry on the beach. I'm not very good at being in front of the camera just because it's not my favourite place to be. But yeah, it's an old snap that works quite well for it. And lots of pictures of the grumpet, lots of reviews and things like that. And you can buy it through the website or you can get it on Amazon. And then if you want to come and talk to me, then it's thepollybateman.com. There's another lady called Polly Bateman who has a different site, and so I am the Polly Bateman, which I was super awkward about when my American team suggested it. And I was like, "What? No, I'm British. We don't boast like that." You know, and I had to really get past myself at the time. So it's thepollybateman.com, and also I'm quite prolific on Instagram, and so we do a lot of stuff on Instagram, and it's just at the Polly Bateman, so on Instagram, and I think there's Facebook as well. I don't deal with that side of things. I just churn the content out. My team put it in different places, but at the Polly Bateman, you'll find me on any of the social media platforms.
Brilliant. Well, I mean, I feel like we could have gone off in so many different directions tonight, and you know, if we had all the time in the world, that would have been amazing. But we got to kind of draw a line somewhere. So I appreciate your time today, and it's been a really, really empowering conversation, I think. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
So there you go. That was the fantastic Polly Bateman. So yeah, a great conversation there about how we can all kind of try to dig into who we are underneath all the programming and under the culture and the expectations placed upon us by the world around us. And don't forget, you can find out more about this podcast at conversationsonliving.com, including previous episodes, my newsletter, that kind of thing. And you can also find out more about Polly at thepollybateman.com and also on Instagram at thepollybateman. Next week, we have got more of the same. We are looking at how to kind of let go and forgive and live a life in peace. But at the same time, instead of turning our back on the world, turn to confront those things which are important to us and we believe need engaging with. And I'm going to be speaking with the amazing Raduli Weininger on that. So check it out. That's going to be a fantastic conversation. But in the meantime, have a lovely day.